When talking about monkey ball ROM hacking, and really ROM hacking in general, it can be easy to forget how many of these projects are only done by one person. Whether it be a pack as small as a 3-stage demo, or quite literally the pack with the most individual levels out of any of them, basically all of these have one forerunning member of their team, the level designer. These days it's also pretty common to also have someone helping out with texturing and lighting, since that's become so advanced now in its own right. But that's usually it. That's all there is to packs besides maybe a handful of guest levels and technical help. This one-man band approach to making things can have benefits, most notably that it allows for a remarkably uncompromised vision from the level designer. However, there's one massive cost that comes into frame with a project of that sort. Time. Time in a medium like ROM hacking where standards and quality are constantly going up, as new improvements are made seemingly month to month at points, can become an overwhelming challenge to face. Just think about working on a pack before Monkey Ball came out, only to now be expected to reach a much higher standard. Then have that happen again when Gaiden comes out. It can reform the way a hack looks and feels entirely after long enough, especially if the early releases of it were also published. In this environment, 3 ROM hacks were forced to evolve in the tumultuous Wild West that was early SMB ROM hacking, and yet somehow managed to have final releases that were up to par with their contemporaries on scale if nothing else. While one of these 3 developments would be left largely as a mystery, the other 2 would be very public in form. Those 2 are Super Monkey Ball Dimensions and Super Monkey Ball Banana Bash, the next 2 complete packs up for discussion. Welcome everyone to this special double feature edition of the Complete Packs discussion. And really, when you consider every public build of these, it actually comes out to 7 for Shattered Reality and 5 for Banana Bash. That's 12 for those playing at home, and yes, that is also the number of complete packs in this entire retrospective, coincidentally. For the sake of overall brevity though, we'll only be looking at the most recent builds for both in this discussion. I might mention an earlier build here or there if it did something noteworthy that the current release doesn't do, but otherwise we'll just be looking at Super Monkey Ball Dimensions Shattered Reality and Super Monkey Ball Banana Bash Remastered. Let's start with the latter. Banana Bash has a major through line within it that makes it difficult to recommend past a single playthrough. Quantity over quality. See, Cherim did successfully make the single largest Monkey Ball ROM hack out of the entire bunch. 16 worlds and 20 original level themes can be found in the complete story mode alone. There's also reworked vanilla backgrounds in some stages to further variety. And if nothing else, the pack does have variety. Quite a lot of it, honestly. Just not necessarily the kind of variety that rewards multiple playthroughs. Yes, having 20 custom world styles sounds impressive, but that aspect is diminished when backgrounds like this are used less than half as often as backgrounds like this. This only gets more confusing when looking at both water themes. One of these is clearly more ambitious and sticks out from the others with more compelling levels. Wouldn't it make more sense to merge these into one world by taking the best parts of both? Having a more dedicated mechanical level theme would also be super useful. It's pretty common in the level design throughout and yet never really gets to shine, at least aesthetically, because they're stuck in kind of ill-fitting environments. The only one that they could somewhat fit in is underutilized for this, and even there it isn't exactly perfect. If you cut down the fat that exists here exclusively for variety and high quantity, you'd see a massive improvement stylistically. Regrettably, this quantity over quality aspect is present in every part of BBR, not just level themes. To be clear, BBR does have a lot of good levels. No matter how cynically anyone wants to look at the way this pack was made, it's undeniable that Cherim made a lot of solid stages here. I go as far as to say that he hits the mark a good 2/3 of the time. If he just took those and maybe polished them a tiny bit more while he was at it, I'd be able to recommend this one without issue. As is though, you're dealing with about 50 levels worth of filler or old ideas that just don't work very well. Even the better worlds like World 7 still have stages that wouldn't have felt out of place in the build of this ROM hack from 4 years ago. Most of this is harmless in a bubble, you might not even notice it on your first playthrough, but the more you play this, the more you'll begin to feel the filler bog down the entire experience. It honestly makes me wish that the entire campaign was consolidated into one ISO. This would also require a rework of the password, I'm aware, but Gaiden was able to make a similar system work, and even the Infernal mode included in the Windows expansion operates on similar rules. Even if it wasn't used for more story worlds, I could totally see the system in place for story being used to unlock Infernal Mode or something. I even just thought of a fun gimmick where you have to pick from all the stages and guess the correct one in a list of buttons, but each one actually has the puzzle piece contained within it. Unless you played story, you wouldn't know which was accurate. This also plays into the riddle aspect in a fun way and could likely be accomplished with minimal effort. As for what to do with Master in this conceptual 1 ISO setup, it could be reworked into a modified Expert Extra, or have them cut and left the story exclusive levels to keep Infernal Mode somewhat intact. This condensing process could be expanded further by rebalancing Beginner, Advanced, and Expert mode to all be comparable lengths to ease the difficulty curve and better show off the challenge mode friendly level design. As for the old archive, it could still be kept as a 100% bonus for completing Infernal Mode and still be maintained on a second ISO. Also, and this might seem odd and or obvious to mention, but you have bananas everywhere. The life system here would be more forgiving than in just about every other pack if implemented normally, and yet instead we just have a death counter that only serves to completely devalue the main gimmick of the pack. I feel that needs reiteration. Monkey Ball Banana Bash, a game which heavily uses bananas in the level design per this gimmick, offers you nothing for collecting bananas. At that point, what even makes challenge mode different from story? Why wouldn't the entire game be built around story if you're fine with using multiple ISOs? Challenge is a much less convenient format when used outside of its wheelhouse. There's no reset button, there's no stage select, it only works as a marathon experience that no longer exists here. Why is challenge mode even here if there are no lives? Again, this was probably done to minimize difficulty for such a long pack, but you can't just cut the core component of challenge mode over that concern. You could keep a steady difficulty curve just by starting the player with 5 lives on the base ISO like Monkey 2 did, and allow them to buy the rest after playing through story mode. As is, any traditional life challenge isn't even doable in BBR without awkwardly keeping score yourself. And that's just not what challenge mode is about. So for a quick rundown of what I've covered so far, BBR is just a little too big for its own good. Its scale is impressive, and the idea of BBR acting less as one sustained pack and story, and more as this big anthology of individual worlds, is genuinely interesting. But that would only work if each world was given more focus and paid greater attention to in its level themes. My biggest hope for this one is that we get a heavily trimmed down Banana Bash Kai at some point, but until then, I can only recommend this one to dedicated completionists of each Monkey Ball Romhack, doubly so for the Windows expansion. The rest of the highlights from this one can be found in the community packs. Alright, time for part 2 of this double feature. Super Monkey Ball Dimensions, Shattered Reality. Right from the beginning, it's clear that Dimensions doesn't have the same issue of quantity over quality that BBR does. DSR makes use of a single ISO with a normal 10-world campaign. Some stages are left as challenge exclusive, but that's it. In all honesty, I'd say that both of these have about an equal amount of good stages and concepts. The only difference is the amount of unnecessary content that's also present. That's not to say it has the edge in every area either. Besides a couple standout level themes, I'd even say that Banana Bash is the better looking pack. It is pretty odd to me though that for both hacks, the fire level was the serious sore spot in terms of graphical fidelity. At least the World 2 checkers are nice in DSR's case. DSR also takes more advantage of higher speed levels. In general, tougher stages reward more daring tactics that are very speedrun friendly. Needless to say, this was a breath of fresh air coming right from BBR to this. Dimensions also has one very cool trick up its sleeve: ghost platforms. These might be my favorite gimmick ever introduced by a Romhack, and it's taken to full effect throughout the game. These start appearing in World 3 in small doses and appear more and more as you play, but don't become the center of attention until World 5. And on World 5, it's probably the most praised out of the entire pack, and I can see why. The level theming is inventive, if a bit old looking now due to an 8 skybox, and the use of ghost platforms feels more at home here than ever. Most of the level design keeps up the pace the game has set up to this point too. I think my only big complaint is that the ghost platforms weren't introduced here and taken more advantage of overall. The ones that are here are great though, and this is definitely the highlight of the game overall. Once you start hitting DSR's late game, notably World 8 and 9, you broadly feel the game start to slow down a bit. The level design is taking a more mechanical approach starting here, and to be honest I can dig what it's trying to accomplish. It feels a bit odd going from the speed-oriented game we've had up to this point, but for what it is, I think it works for increasing the sense of difficulty near the end of the game. The aptly titled Dimensional Reft further strengthened this point with a particularly interesting send-off. These assorted level themes were really fun to look at, and the exam format being applied to each world at the end was honestly pretty ingenious. The only issue I have is the wires, and honestly that's a problem all throughout the game. It may have been caused by the way DSR was tested, but overall I feel like traditional wires here were always a grade tougher than everything else around them in terms of level design. World 2's rep has this problem here in spades, but besides that, the curve between each challenge is great. We end on the titular stage Dimensions, a fantastic and impressively speedy level that acts as a stellar story mode send-off. Clearly DSR gets a lot right in story mode. That ending portion with the more mechanical heavy level design wasn't a perfect shift from the speedier early game, but still managed to hold its own pretty well. It's not like it totally came out of nowhere either, to be clear. The only problem is when those learner stages make their way into challenge mode. DSR Beginner and Advanced are perfectly fine in this regard, to be fair. They do everything I could ask of a challenge mode of this sort, and I'll likely find myself coming back to them pretty routinely. Expert, on the other hand, is a little more rough around the edges. I'm just not a big fan of the stages in Earthworm Gymland here, at least for challenge mode. But otherwise I really don't have any complaints besides the very uneven banana placement. Master is also pretty good on its own. Not necessarily 3 life challenge friendly, but neither is Vanilla Master in either game, so that's fine. You can still buy lives as well here, so it's not a big deal. It's examples like the life system that make me wonder if some of it comes down to the creator's mentality. Banana Bash has so many levels that are either in dire need of updating, or simply need to be left in the archives. Dimensions feels as if it was able to understand when to cut an old level and when to go that extra mile, and for the most part I really think it paid off. There's so much less wasted space here, largely thanks to the more compact form factor. Put it into the most poignant of terms, if the Mega Maze had originally been made as part of Banana Bash and not Dimensions, I honestly think it'd still be there in the modern build, with little or no change. It's a shame too because of how much BBR shows respect for its roots in the Windows expansion. It's so nice to have all of this history be so easily accessible, but it can also show that besides the visuals, not much has changed for some of these older builds compared to their newer counterparts. DSR doesn't actually do this, partially because a couple builds are currently lost media, but hopefully it can one day get similar treatment. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention Monkey Ball Universe Final Mix, the pack that succeeded Dimensions' lengthy development. While technically outside the window of this retrospective, it acts as an extensive, story-centered remix of the contents of Shattered Reality. It's similarly recommendable in spite of the greater difficulty spikes within it compared to Dimensions, but I'll talk about it more another time. That's it for this Complete Pack's double feature. Next time we have even more to cover. Join us then for a complete look at the works of NGUU. See you then.